So you have patients that are eating from seed oils, vegetable oils. We're putting them on a low salt diet. We're waking them up at 3 a.m. So this has fueled the fire a little bit once I start to realize like what goes on in the actual hospital where we're supposed to be making people better. And I don't know what the solution is, but it's definitely not making anything better doing it like that. When I'm eating mostly meat, I had a dramatic change. My mood changed. I didn't have to drink caffeine anymore. I didn't have dandruff in my hair anymore, especially when I was on the clinical side of things, putting in 12 to 18-hour days. And when I started going on this diet, I just realized that I didn't have food cravings in the middle of the day. I wasn't tired on my feet, a decent amount of muscle mass on me, but I wasn't trying to lose weight. But I looked considerably better after losing that weight, and I dropped a lot of body fat, and I felt great, and my joints felt good.
All right, welcome. Today we have with us Dr. Clay Moss from South Florida, I guess Tampa, which is, I guess officially it is South Florida. Anyway, you are, correct me if I'm wrong, but physical medicine and rehabilitation specialist, or you're doing your training with that at University of South Florida. So you've got an MD and you're specializing into kind of it's a good field. It's because it's about getting people in shape and healthy and rehabbing and stuff like that. And correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me a little about your background.
Yeah. So I actually I was born and raised on the Panhandle, right outside Pensacola, Florida, in a little town called Gulf Breeze. And went through medical school I went to undergrad at Ole Miss, went through medical school at the University of Mississippi. Originally wanted to be a plastic surgeon and found my way to PM&R. Not many people know what that is, and I didn't know what it was until like the beginning of third year of medical school. For your viewers,
it's not a big specialty. There's not a lot of
it's a broad specialty, but it is its own little niche. Not many people go into it. And for your viewers that have no idea what it is, PM&R stands for Physical Medicine and Rehab. And basically what that is, you're focusing on restoring function to people that either have injuries or just any sort of like traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury. And that's more of the traditional inpatient side of things. And then you can also go the sports medicine route, and then like regenerative medicine, kind of stem cell stuff, all that stuff on the outpatient side. And I know you're orthopedic trained, so we work pretty hand in hand with you guys. And I don't know if there's any beef there, because you guys typically do the surgeries and we try to prevent the surgeries. So that's what the PM&R route usually is. But yeah.
I'm all about preventing surgery these days anyway, so it doesn't really matter to me. I had a good buddy of mine we used to power lift together, and he's a PM&R guy. Yeah. YU10. I think he might be in Texas. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a good, I imagine you work pretty closely with physical therapists and whatnot as well, I would imagine.
Yeah. So I'm in my intern year right now. And what that basically means is I've been doing kind of month to month doing different things. So I've done 4 months of internal medicine on the inpatient side. I've done the ER for a month. I've done rheumatology for a month. It's just a random hodgepodge of things you do your first year. And so I'll be getting into the PM&R side of things probably in about, beginning of June. I start really getting on the rehab side of things. So I'll be a little bit more in touch with that side of the world come that time.
Yeah, that first year is tough because you do all this stuff you may not even want to do, and you're just like
exactly.
Here, I remember I did two. For some reason, I got stuck with 2 months of vascular surgery, and I hated it because all the patients were all just chain smokers, and they didn't care. And it was, oh man, we're cutting off more legs and doing these bypasses that never work.
Yeah, I got stuck with a full month of neuroradiology. So just at radiographs in a dark room for 7 hours a day.
Yeah. I thought about radiology pretty hard, particularly the interventional aspect, but I was like, I just can't spend my life sitting in a dark room. I like doing stuff and moving and being active and just sitting there all day, slide after slide.
Yeah. And I have to talk to people. So I'm the same way.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So why am I talking to you? What's going on?
Yeah. So it's interesting the way we got connected. I've been a big fan of yours for quite a while. I watched your podcast with Rogan back in 2017. And I know you just did the recent one this past year. And then I've read your book too. I read Paul Saladino's book. So I guess I could start with back whenever I had a very interesting medical school, because back when COVID was going on, I was into my first year of medical school, going into my second. I know you're well aware, the first 2 years of medical school, you're doing all classes, didactics, taking tests every day. You're not in the clinical side of things. During my second year of medical school, once all the COVID-19 stuff started unfolding, I started questioning the whole traditional medicine path. I'm somebody that I love kind of reading on my own time. And I read books like The Healing Self by Deepak Chopra. I read your book. I read Salt Fix by James DeNicolantonio, I'm a big fan of his. Paul Saladino too. I got into this time and started realizing as I went along, maybe we're missing something, or maybe there's an agenda here. It's sad when you start to realize the politics that go into medicine, the politics that are also in science nowadays. And so I started exploring those kind of non-traditional approaches to medicine. And I've done the carnivore diet since, I think it's been about 2 years now. And I go on and off. I'm not super strict about it, but when I'm eating mostly meat, I had a dramatic change. My mood changed. I didn't have to drink caffeine anymore. I didn't have dandruff in my hair anymore, especially when I was on the clinical side of things. I was putting in 12 to 18-hour days. And when I started going on this diet, I just realized that I didn't have food cravings in the middle of the day. I wasn't tired on my feet. When you're going through surgery rotations, sometimes there's 8 to 12-hour surgeries that you have to stay alert at all times. I started going down this path and realizing that maybe there's a little bit more than prescribing a drug and trying to fix things with a Band-Aid instead of actually getting to the root cause of the problem. So I reached out to your team originally just because I was a fan of yours. I just wanted to pick your brain about things. And then they replied and were like, yeah, sure, we'll have you on the podcast. So I was like, oh, okay. I was going more for the private conversation, but I guess we'll just go head first into it. I'm excited to get into this with you. And I apologize if I end up asking you more questions than me, because like I said, I'm at the very beginning of my clinical training and residency. So I'm learning as we go along. I learned from you, Rogan, a lot of the people. I know you're well acquainted with Jordan Peterson. I heard him mention you on his podcast the other day. And so I've been learning from people like y'all in order to incorporate that into my own life and then hopefully my own practice going forward afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. Where I'm still learning every day. There's no end to that process for sure. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Thing that obviously, how long is a PM&R residency? Is it like a 4-year deal, 3-year deal? What's the period of time you're going to be committed?
Yeah, 4 years. The first year is an intern year, so then 3
after that. And then I think the challenge for you, in my view, is if you're going to deviate from the norm, and it's weird that treating disease with decent lifestyle nutrition is considered not typical, which to me is shocking. You got to figure out a way you can practice in that framework and still do it. Because if you're like employed and you're part of this big hospital system, which unfortunately most physicians are these days, there's just been a corporate takeover. All the hospital systems are all being bought up by and being consolidated. Everybody's singing from the same song sheet. If you don't sing from that song sheet, you're out of a job type of thing. So it's got to be, it may be that you just open your own clinic and you'll attract the patients that want to be treated the way you treat them. Kind of like we're doing at Revero. We're like, hey, if you want the diagnosis pill for the rest of your life sort of scenario, then there's plenty of that for you. And if you want something else, you got to make yourself an alternative opportunity, and hopefully you'll be allowed to continue to practice that way, which I hope. I could imagine them trying to say, well, it's not legal to tell people to eat healthy. I mean, literally.
Somehow they'll find a way to do that.
We're at a point where I think that is something that I remember my friend Gary Fettke's an ortho. He had some huge investigation by the Australian licensing agencies that he was inappropriately reversing diabetes on his patients by telling them to stop eating sugar. What inappropriately do? It's just insane. Some of the stuff that we have to put up with. It's just nonsense. Let me ask you, as far as, because I know obviously I know what PM&R is. I've never been to a PM&R doctor or clinic, or I've interacted with a few very short term, but who are your patients going to be?
Yeah. So it's an interesting scenario. So just to back up a little bit, I got into this field because I had approached my mentor at the time, who was a plastic surgeon in residency, and told him I've been getting into these alternative kind of medical practices. I think that I want to be somebody who treats things at the root cause. I do love surgery. That's just not my thing. I got to have my hands on a bunch of different things to keep me occupied. And what really made me tick was getting my dad and my aunt. They went to these kind of, I guess you would call them like longevity doctors. One of them is a PM&R guy in Pensacola, Dave LeMay. I've heard countless stories about him changing people's lives, but kind of what you guys are doing at Revero, it's basically you take a bunch of lab results at the first meeting and you get a full history from somebody, and then you try to change things one thing at a time, either through diet, through lifestyle, through supplementation, and then the last resort, you resort to medication. And what they figured out is, and multiple other of my family members, is they would do all these labs and they would say, oh, like you have X, Y, and Z gene mutations, or you are deficient in this and this. And their doctors in the past have just been putting them on medication right off the bat, when they could have at least tried to go towards supplementing through vitamins and things like that, like methylated B vitamins are a new thing that's a topic of discussion now. and they felt dramatically better just going through these things. And they've, for the last 20, 25 years, have been doing it wrong through traditional practices. So I went into PM&R. My mentor had told me that if he had gone back, he actually would have considered doing that. And so I went into PM&R knowing that it focuses on physical health and it's more of a holistic practice. I was MD trained, but a lot of DO students do go into PM&R and they get the osteopathic medicine side of things. And it is a little bit more geared towards root cause and at least taking people where they are and just trying to make them functionally better. When I started interviewing for residencies, I made it pretty clear up front, which maybe wasn't the best way to go about it, but people actually, a lot of the program directors that I talked to, I just told, I really do want to possibly open up my own clinic in the future and it be more of a root cause analysis, longevity, regenerative medicine style clinic instead of, I'd say, the traditional way to go through PM&R, which is inpatient brain injury, spinal cord injury, stroke rehab, or just the sports medicine outpatient that you would typically go through. So everybody was super receptive to that. And I've been clear up front, that's just what I want to do. So although I really do like the PM&R side of things, I think that it is a method to get to that end goal of opening up something that I can at least treat things by the root cause.
Yeah, I think when you talk about supplements and all these other things, you've got to first, in my view, you have to first get people to stop poisoning themselves. That has to be primary. And if you can't get people to stop poisoning themselves, any sort of remedy you can put on there is pissing in the wind a little bit. The nice thing about PMR is you get a lot of other good sort of tools. I'm known as a carnivore guy and nutrition, and that's what I get labeled with, but I'm just as much about physical performance, strength, exercise, good sleep, all those things. I know I'm getting close to 60 and I've got some goals laid out for me, and I'm really focused on stuff like jumping. Even I'm a freaking 260-pound man. I'm trying to dunk a basketball. I'm actually pretty damn close, quite honestly, which is funny. But it's just these things, these other practices that involve the musculoskeletal system, because we talk about the heart and lungs as the engine of our body in a way, and we got to protect that by doing the right things. But our frame is just as important. It doesn't matter if your car has a great engine and if it's got flat tires and a cracked axle. It doesn't matter. So you got to maintain the whole thing. And part of that is the physicality side of it, which I think is incredibly important. It's funny. I get people telling me, "Oh, why are you exercising so hard? It's just going to shorten your life." And I'm like, I don't know. I don't think it is, but maybe you only get so many heartbeats, and putting stress on your body is bad. You should just sit on the couch and read poetry and think about whatever. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's not me anyway, regardless. But what in your time, obviously you saw my podcast. There's a lot of other people now. When I went on Rogan back in late 2017, I was really the first guy on a large audience to talk about this and bring this attention, certainly the first physician to do. And since that time now, you've got, could not tell you how many people are Carnivore Carl and Carnivore Karen, and there's gazillions of people at this point. So clearly it is something that's happening. And the nice thing is, in my view, is that it works. That's just the bottom line. It works well for a lot of people. And that's why it continues to grow. And I think we're going to there's going to be a time of reckoning at some point. People are going to have to address it one way or the other, and either they make it illegal. You're not allowed to eat this diet. You need to eat the slave diet, as I like to call it sometimes. So interesting. I assume, like you traditionally, did you go straight from high school, college, straight to medical school? So you're mid-20s, I would assume. Is that fair to say? 26. Yeah. I was a little late. I had a period in the military in between, and I played professional sports, and then I actually started medical school, did my first year, dropped out to go professional rugby, and then dicked around in the military for a few years, and then came back. And I'm saying that very facetiously, and then came back. And so I finished my medical school and my surgical training when I was, I think, just before I turned 40, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in that time frame. So I was a little bit older guy, and it helped me because I was very disciplined. I was just like, I always got, good. I always got A's and did well on the tests and blah, 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 and got into ortho. But what is the people around you? I assume most of you, same age, similar age. What are they all buying into this plant-based nonsense, or what is amongst your colleagues and friends?
I wouldn't say that the majority of them are buying into the plant-based stuff, but when I first started going down this road, so this was back in probably 2020, my roommate at the time had showed me Paul Saladino's Instagram page and was like, this guy's basically just eating meat, and he was also incorporating fruit in his diet too. And It has all these results, and it was a joke at that point. And then I started to dial it in and go down that road, and is when I started to do it myself. And I'm trying to think. So I started, and within 9 weeks, I had dropped 5 or 6% body fat and about 12 pounds. And I'm a pretty skinny guy, so I have a decent amount of muscle mass on me, but I wasn't trying to lose weight. But I looked considerably better after losing that weight, and I dropped a lot of body fat, and I felt great. My joints felt good. And so I just started to continue to do this. And then people in my med school class, we had just gotten done with second year. We'd gone through 2 full years learning anatomy, biochemistry, physiology, nothing really about diet, but basically just have a well-balanced diet. It's just the only thing they would really tell us. We didn't have anything other than that, didn't go any deeper than that. Didn't even have a diet class or anything incorporated into any of our classes about diet or exercise or lifestyle. And yeah, I would say there was quite a few people that looked at me like I was crazy. And once I started posting it on social media, just here's my results. Like, I actually really enjoy this. I'm not necessarily telling you that you should do this. I feel great. And I think that it's an avenue to go down if you're not feeling good and you want to try something new. And I started to get back all of these replies. Half of them were like, this is crazy. This is ridiculous. Like, meat's bad for you. What about cholesterol? And then the other half was like, oh, my dad actually did this diet for the last 6 months. He's lost 55 pounds and doesn't have eczema anymore. Or one of my friend's parents, her dad, you start to hear some crazy things. Like, her dad was almost so fair skinned, almost albino, wearing sunscreen, SPF 100 for the last 50 years, going outside. And he's done carnivore for the last 6 months, lost all this weight, feels great. And now he can tan for the first time without wearing sunscreen. So you started to hear all of these weird anecdotes. And once it gets to a certain point, then you start to buy into it. Okay, there's not too much research on this, but I've heard so many anecdotes from so many people about how it changed their life that now I'm starting to speak up a little bit more about it to at least my friends, not necessarily patients at this point, because I am under that umbrella of being in a residency program, and you have to tread lightly on how far out you step. But it's definitely been an exciting thing to get into.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, when you're a resident, you're practicing under someone else's you got your own license, but you're ultimately, someone else is responsible for your behavior. It's like the faculty are like, don't fuck up, guy. Because it's like somebody's putting their license in your hands and you're learning how to operate and stuff or whatever, or practice medicine. So it's an interesting time that you're in. And how's the lifestyle in residency? When I went, it sucked. I mean, we were friggin' 40 hours, Cat. We were working 120 hours a week and no friggin' sleep. And you're working around like a freaking zombie for 5 years. And what's it like these days? Probably softer, I would imagine.
It's definitely softer than that. I would say that. I think the trade-off is whenever you're in medical school now, you have so much access to information that you're expected to take in so much. So maybe the physical toll and actually being there is not nearly as bad. And honestly, I prefer not being there for 120 hours a week. But the amount of stuff that you have to take in, because there's so much widespread access to information, and medical school nowadays is geared, your main thing in medical school is to not piss anybody off during your clinical rotation so you don't get any bad reviews. And then to do well on step 1 and step 2, which are your standardized tests, because that's basically what tells you how many interviews you're going to get in residency. So I would say it's gruesome in the fact that you have to take in a lot of information. But now in residency, there's certain months that are bad. 4 months of internal medicine, you're at the hospital quite a bit, 70, 80 hours a week. Legally, they cap it at 80 now. So it's not as bad as probably when you were in residency. And it's not nearly as bad as any surgical specialty. I have friends that they still have those nightmare stories in general surgery and orthopedics too. It wavers. Like right now I'm on rheumatology, and it's more of a 9 to 5, 8 to 5 clinic ordeal. And thankfully they let me take off today because I said I was doing this. So shout out to them. But yeah,
let me ask you about the rheumatology, because rheumatology, a lot of autoimmune disease. That's where a lot of autoimmune, whether it's psoriasis or ankylosing spondylitis or psoriatic or rheumatoid arthritis or you name it. It's just the weird stuff. Everybody else, it's a weird thing, gets into the rheumatologist outside of some of the GI stuff and dermatology stuff, but it's a lot of autoimmune. I would assume you're seeing a lot of autoimmune in the rheumatology clinic. Is anyone talking about diet to these patients at all? Or is it all just
no,
biologics and corticosteroids and methotrexate? And
it's a lot of methotrexate and rituximab. I will say that. And a lot of these patients they're old, they're in their 90s, they're pretty frail, but we have some patients come in that are pretty healthy and I have to basically bite my tongue. I do talk to them about diet. I try to spend an X number of time with my patients telling them some people have had relief trying to do a low carb diet, like ketogenic diet. I don't necessarily push carnivore because it is a little bit more controversial.
Don't say the C word.
Exactly. But I've actually had two patients that told me that they tried out carnivore. They just told me on their own time. And one of them said that he had great results and now he tries to eat mostly meat. And ironically, he's one of our patients that's doing probably better than the rest of them. Yeah, it's a lot of autoimmune conditions. So you can imagine I'm biting my tongue on trying to give the whole spiel to every one of my patients.
Yeah, interesting. Very much. What about as far as do you eat at the hospital? Do you eat at home? How do you manage your diet given where you're probably spending a lot of time in the hospital?
Yeah, I'll usually cook the day before. So a couple of days ago, I went to work yesterday. Two nights ago, I would just, whip up a pound of ground beef, 9 or 10 eggs, some, cottage cheese, stuff like that, and just put it in 1 or 2 meals just for the next day. If I can't get to it, I'll actually pull your kind of trick on my lunch break. I'll sometimes drive to either McDonald's or Wendy's and go off the a la carte menu, and that's actually fared pretty well. I'll just get 3 or 4 beef patties with maybe some cheese on the side, and that'll pretty much hold me over for the rest of the day.
Yeah, that is one thing. I think about it when I was, doing my residency years and years ago, 25 years ago, I didn't know any of this stuff. And thinking about, because we barely had time to eat. And I was, you figure if you were to slam a bunch of steak and eggs for breakfast, you wouldn't need to eat. That's a nice thing. It's so efficient. It helps you be more productive. Yeah. Did you notice any improvements in your cognitive abilities, mental acuity, mood lability, stability, tiredness, fatigue? Any of those things improve with you? Because you're generally a young, healthy guy, I would assume, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. All of those improved. When I was in college, I have an interesting little health stint there. So when I was in college, I had strep 4 to 6 times a year, all 4 years of college. I would get strep throat. If I went out and I drank after somebody, like I'd wake up the next morning and I'd have to go get tested for strep. And I had the whole stack of papers and everything. After I graduated college, I went to an ENT to get my tonsils removed. And he was like, okay, there's no way you have strep this amount of times. And I actually showed him the paperwork of every time that I tested positive for it. Ended up getting my tonsils taken out. This was all before the lifestyle and all of that kind of stuff. And I was eating really well I was meal prepping and everything. I was basically eating chicken, broccoli, and rice every single day of the week. Granted, I was drinking a little bit more than I do nowadays in college, so that probably had a lot to do with it. But once I've started adapting these carnivore/keto diet approaches, I haven't gotten sick nearly as much. I might get sick once or twice a year, and it's just like a common cold. Funny enough, the worst time I ever had strep throat was like 3 months after I got my tonsils removed, and I didn't realize that was possible. So I'm glad I haven't had that since. But backtracking to what you said about eating at the hospital, one of the things that really makes me not upset, but it just disappoints me is the first few times I've tried to eat at the hospital, tried to do like the burger patties or something like that. And the hospital cafeterias, it's all carbs. Like you go and you're eating spaghetti with a big slice of bread, noodles, pasta. And then once you go to the grill part of it, there's just dousing the grill with seed oils, vegetable oil, canola oil, because it doesn't smoke up the hospital and it's cheap. And it's really sad that the same kitchen is the one feeding the patients too. You have patients that are eating from seed oils, vegetable oils. We're putting them on a low salt diet. We're waking them up at 3 a.m. So this has fueled the fire a little bit once I start to realize like what goes on in the actual hospital where we're supposed to be making people better. And I don't know what the solution is, but it's definitely not making anything better doing it like that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. There was a guy named Marco Cozzella, I think he's an internal medicine guy in West Virginia, and he lobbied for a long time to get the hospital to change their menu. Mm-hmm. And they did. They actually installed a low carb sort of option. And that was in place for a number of years. And then corporation takes over. They buy the hospital system and they go, nope, not doing this. We want to go back to the cheap stuff. It's a shame because you go to the hospital and you get your friggin' green Jello and the friggin' pancakes with fake syrup and God knows what else they serve our post-op patients. It's a sad situation. You have to fight it. When I had patients in the hospital after I had discovered the benefits of diet, when I was putting people on like ketogenic diets at the time, I would tell them literally, I tell their wives or husbands, hey, you got to cook for your husband or wife because you ain't getting good food while you're in the hospital. And I would always write for a diabetic diet. And that was still like 60 grams of carbohydrates per meal, which is still a lot in my view. It's interesting. Yeah,
Do you mind if I ask you a question really quick? Because I'm just interested because I've listened to both your podcasts with Rogan and it's been about 8 years since you started doing the diet. I know Paul Saladino is one of those guys that he started pretty strict and then started adding in fruits he started adding in fruits at least because he said what he had was adrenal fatigue.
Yeah, maybe.
Something like that. How have your thoughts changed over those 8 years and mental clarity, performance, anything like that, or anything you've learned about the diet? And then I've heard you touch briefly on it before, but what are your thoughts about adding in fruits as well?
Yeah, I'm not going to say what works for me works for every single person. Man, I'm strict carnivore and I love it. I feel great. I'm like, literally, I just PR'd my lifetime pull-up thing this morning. It's not very impressive. 14 is the best I've ever done in my life, which sucks, but I'm super long arms. I'm 260 pounds. So that's the last time I did that, I was in the military training for the physical fitness test, and I was probably maybe 240 at the time. Oh. But it was funny because I did a week of adding fruit to my diet a few months back, and everybody was losing their mind over, oh my God, I'm doing carnivore. And I was like, I did that specifically to test out the effect of adding X amount of carbohydrates back in my diet would have on my lipid numbers. And it turned out for me, that amount didn't affect me significantly. What it did do is make my guts feel crappy. And I said, I ain't doing this. I don't like it. I personally do better without it. Some people will criticize Paul's decision because he was pounding organ meats. And he's got an organ meat supplement company. And so he's got a conflict of interest there. And a lot of people like when I started doing carnivore back close to 8 years ago. And then I'd been doing it a little while. Then he came to ask me about it. And he said, I think you need to do organ meats. I said, no, I don't think you do, Paul. And he said, the RDA, this and that. I said, Paul, I don't think the RDA is necessarily applicable. And there are people that have been doing this for 20 years and they don't use organ meats. And they say the people that do it, they stop because it doesn't work for them. So maybe he's, I don't know, vitamin A overdosed or something. Who knows? It's hard to say. Or maybe it's an easier sell when you're saying, hey, just eat a bunch of fruit, sweet, it tastes good. And a lot of people are still sugar addicts, and that appeals to them. So from a marketing standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. From a physiologic standpoint, it doesn't. If you make the argument that a very low carb diet, even a ketogenic diet, has unique advantages in adding a bunch of fruit in there, 200, 300, 400 grams or whatever he's up to, is going to nullify those advantages in a way. Now, there's some people, obviously, the repeat guys, who think, we should be consuming copious amounts of sugar and drinking Mexican Cokes and all this weird stuff that I would disagree with. So like I said, I think for me, there is an adaptation period, particularly even as an athlete. And this is where a lot of people say, I'm an athlete, I need the carbs. And I think if you're carb adapted, you certainly do. And how long does it take to truly be adapted to running off of primarily fat? Phil Prim's up near Pittsburgh, PhD, has looked at some of the sports medicine. He's shown that athletes having better performance compared to carbohydrate-based diets and ketogenic diets on these people that are appropriately adapted. So it might be 6 months to fully adapt in my experience. And that's been my thing. Yeah. So I'm routinely putting up world-class numbers on the rowing machine. I'm literally about to break a bunch more world records where I'm at right now, probably hitting lifetime PRs again at this sort of relatively late age. I friggin' deadlifting. I pulled 500 for a set of 10 about a month or two back. I hit 400 for 405 for 20. These are all lifetime numbers for me in some regard. There was probably a period of time when I was pulling close to 800 pounds where I probably could have hit that had I tested it. But certainly since I've been about 43 over the last 14 years, I've never been stronger. And I think that's a testament to, obviously, I will tell you, has anything changed my mind over the years? Not really much about nutrition, but what has changed my mind a little bit is how valuable sleep is, because that is something I was somewhat lacking on in regard, because I was just staying up too late. I was friggin' working on social media, playing with my phone, not getting the sleep I need. And I've recently really addressed to say, hey, bedtime, hard bedtime, go to sleep, put on some soft music or whatever, and and it's made a big difference. And so I don't think you need fruit. I really don't. I think some people may prefer it. Some people may say they do better with that. But to say that This is the one thing that I'm very non-dogmatic about this. So I don't like to make proclamations or decrees with absolutes as saying that all people need to consume fruit or carbohydrates to function is wrong in my view, because clearly a lot of people don't, and I'm one of them. I literally always feel my best when I'm pretty much just eating meat. I mean, my diet over the year, sometimes I have some eggs, sometimes I have a little piece of fish, sometimes I have a little bit of dairy products, and extremely rarely I'll have a freaking piece of cake, because because I'm not, it's not like I said, it's not reverse veganism. It's not, oh, if I eat a piece of cake, I'm something bad. I'm a bad person. Whereas vegans, if you friggin' accidentally eat an egg, you're like, oh my God, how dare you not think about the animals? It's ridiculous.
Anyway. And I found similar things too. When I started, I was eating more fruit, and I would find that my cravings didn't necessarily go away like I thought they would. And I would end up eating a whole tub of blueberries or something like that. If I just gave myself an inch, I'd taken a mile. And so when I started doing it again this year, more hardcore, and I just started eating meat, all those cravings went away pretty quickly within 3 days.
Certainly, if your goal is to eat more calories, and for some people that is their goal, like certain athletes, they want to eat a lot because they're trying to put on a lot, and they're trying to put on weight. One of the equation to put on muscle, for instance, is training. Number one, biggest, train your ass off consistently hard. You got to do that. That's by far the biggest factor. And then it's adequate protein. And then beyond that, it's really adequate calories. And sometimes getting calories on a carnivore diet can be challenging. It can, because there's such a satiety effect. And carbohydrates, for many people, make it easier for them to consume. It stimulates appetite. It allows them to eat more in many cases. This is why Stan Efferding vertical diet, training all these monsters, Half Thor and Brian Shaw and whatnot, is, man, I got these guys eating rice covered in dextrose just so it stimulates their, so they eat more, and it's one of those things that there is, like I said, I'm not anti-carb in a way that I think it's evil for all people, but I do think that you have to weigh the pros and cons. For me, at this stage of the game in my life, carbohydrates are a net negative for me, irrespective of any advantages they might give me. Like maybe they could give me an extra 5 watts of power on a rowing machine for a short period of time for one workout, but then maybe my back starts hurting because it inflames me, and then I can't train the next day. So for me, it's a net negative.
And that was pretty reassuring for me too, because I know that have set world records in rowing and things like that, which any conventional dietitian or practitioner will tell you is one of the most glycolytic exercises you can possibly do. It's extremely aerobic, and you're out here doing the things that you're doing without ingesting any sort of carbs.
I mean, it depends on the distances, to be fair, because I'm not doing the Olympic distance, which is 2K, but I think world records in 100 meters, 1 minute, 500 meters, and likely 1,000 meters, I can probably all within my capability. And probably, honestly, if I really wanted to suffer, and if I really wanted to dedicate the time to training for a 2K, I could probably pull a pretty damn good 2K. I'm almost certain of it. The problem is it's just not aligned with the rest of what I want to do with regard to strength and physique. And because like I said, there's a trade-off. And if you go too far to the endurance side, you sacrifice too much muscle, in my view. And I just don't want to do that. It's just not something that, like I said, I've got certain already goals for 60, and they're going to be hard enough. And trying to add a bunch of endurance stuff on there is going to be, that just makes some of it more difficult. But let me ask you about, as far as, are you finding that is medicine still about medicine now? Or are they pushing a bunch of agenda-driven stuff as well? I don't know if you even want to talk about this, maybe not.
No, that's definitely part of the conversation. When I was in medical school, I started realizing that there probably was an agenda. You look at your medical textbooks, and half of them are written by Anthony Fauci and some people that you see in the news and are highly politicized figures now. And not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but the fact when you start seeing people on a public and a televised scale you start to dig into, and you think that are pushing something, and they're the ones writing the medical textbooks that you're basically learning all of your knowledge off of, you start to second guess things. And I know you've spoken about kind of the role that these big companies like BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard play, because they're the ones that they have huge stakes in a lot of the, I guess, the food industry, more of like not your typical like Whole Food, right? Like they have all the companies that are your more like machine chips companies, like everything that they're basically pushing is like high sugar, high added sugar, processed foods. And then they also have a huge stake in all the big pharmaceutical companies. I don't think that's necessarily a topic of conversation on a regular basis in the medical community, but it's one that I hope we start having more on a regular basis, because there is a little bit of an undertone of, especially in this country, that there's something going on where we're trying to make people unhealthy so that they can be treated with medications. That's a big money machine. And I've had these conversations with people in medicine. I think that you have to pick and choose your battles on who you can have those conversations with. But I think most people are aware of that. But the way that medicine's set up right now, I do see a lot of practitioners lose that spark for medicine because they're working for big hospital companies. They're getting reimbursed by big healthcare corporations, health insurance,
Yeah,
things
it's
like
funny.
that.
When I was an employed orthopedic surgeon, and I remember recruiting, because I was the head of the group, I was recruiting other guys in, other surgeons in, and there was another sort of private group that people were going to, and that was a competition.
Mhm.
I was trying to extol the benefits of being employed because you don't have to deal with all the overhead. There's a lot of things you can just do your medicine. Retrospect, you basically sold your soul to that because you lost autonomy, which I didn't appreciate until I realized how, I don't want to say corrupt, well, I do, how compromised the system is. And so, yeah, it's better to be, if at all possible, it's better to be independent, and just so you can do what you want to do within the bounds of medical licensing and things like that. And even that is becoming challenging because of medical licensing starting to dictate. I'm just wondering when there'll be a time where you'll say it's unethical to recommend for people to eat meat. That to me is where I think we could potentially go if we don't use our voices now and just say that's not happening. And certainly it's important. Like I said, I'm trying to get all this research done around carnivore because I think that will have an impact on some policy and things like that. So it's important it's important for a lot of physicians, to use their voices and stop. The emperor has no clothes. I got to point it out. Look, this is BS. You got to basically step up and use your voice. And I know it's tough as a resident because they can say, hey, throw you out of residency. Now what? Now you got all this debt and that way you're in a job. So it's a tenuous time that you're in right now. So you just have to keep your head down, plow ahead, get through your residency, hopefully find a practice that allows you the freedom to do what you may want to do.
And I think that it's easy to fall into the cycle of thinking that things are getting a lot worse as we go along. I think lately, especially with podcasts, like what you do, what Joe Rogan does, and having people on to have these conversations about what they're uncovering about the corruption in pharmaceuticals, the medical industry, and things like that, that the more you find out, you have this illusion that things are getting worse. Whereas I think more and more people are starting to realize what's going on behind the scenes. And I'm hoping that, especially with people my age, half the people now are working from home. They don't necessarily, I would say that the more that medicine becomes socialized and under these big corporations, the less autonomy and purpose that physicians feel, and the easier it is to get burnt out. And I think that people my age, whether it be a good or a bad thing, don't necessarily deal with physician burnout as vigorously as an older generation. So I think once we start getting into our professions, I'm hoping that people stand up for themselves a little bit more going on in the future and realizing what's going on and trying to make that push for medicine to get back to it and not being politicized and not being some sort of agenda that everybody's trying to.
I think your point of like blissful ignorance, before we were ignorant to all the sort of the goings on behind the scenes. And like I said, as someone who's been in medicine for many decades now, I've just seen my general thing, particularly when it comes to pharmacy, is they will always overpromise and underdeliver. That's really almost anything in medicine. They have these high sort of claims, and then the reality is not that. And it's almost with anything. People always overestimate the good and underestimate the bad, and it's pretty consistent. So anytime somebody comes out and tells me something has got 95% efficacy or 100% efficacy, I'm like, yeah, whatever, that ain't happening. Yeah, but it's an interesting time to do that. And I wonder, like I said, if I think about it, if I could go back and tell my son, would I have gone into medicine again? I think the answer is probably yes, I would have. But I might not have gone into orthopedics because I did not like primary care when I was a medical student, because I just remember sitting there listening to physicians constantly bitching about the patients not being compliant, not taking their medicine, not losing weight. And they were just almost miserable people because they just felt like they're floundering. Nothing's getting better. Whereas today, And all I basically do is focus on lifestyle prevention and more kind of primary kind of care type stuff, if you will. Is happy, man. I'm like, man, it's so cool. It is so much fun to practice medicine in a way in which, or to be involved in the practice of medicine, I should say, because I'm not directly doing it, but just be involved in founding a company where we are literally curing people, getting people off medications, and have the potential to do so. That to me is extremely, it's fun. It literally makes medicine fun again. You're like, you just go, and the nice thing is when you see somebody in a rheumatology clinic, they don't want to be there. Most of them, they're like, oh man, this sucks. Why am I here? And they're dependent upon some guy to give them some whatever, something mab, infliximab, or whatever you name the immune modulator, and they got to pay God knows what their deductible is because these things are so damn expensive. That sucks. They're not happy. I remember like neurology was one of the god awful most depressing specialties there was. It's like everybody's gorked out, or they're just, no one's getting better. It's so sad. There's nothing you can do for them. And now it's when I see people, they want to be seen. They're like happy to be there. They're like, it's a different vibe. So hopefully you can develop a practice to where people actually want to see you because you can give them something that somebody's in pain. Yeah, they want pain medicine. But beyond that, it's like, they don't really want, they would prefer not to have the pain than need the pain medicine, if that makes sense.
100%. And that's what I've been trying to, that's basically exactly what I told people when I interviewed for residency is, I honestly wish I could be that person that genuinely enjoyed taking care of extremely sick people all the time. That's what you think of when you are going into medicine as a kid. And then you start to realize how the world really is when you get into it and it's not as glamorous. And then as I got through, like you said, I enjoy people I hang out with on a daily basis are generally health conscious and want to take their health to a next level. And if you can actually have a patient population that wants to do the same, then that does make medicine more fun.
Yeah, it is.
I have a question for you because somebody asked me it the other day. I was talking to them about just lifestyle stuff, carnivore diet, and they asked it in a way that I had never really thought of before. And I'm sure you've answered this before, but they were saying, considering that cholesterol is probably the biggest conversation around the carnivore diet. And I know there's some negative connotation around statins too, but they asked me, if you were going to go on the carnivore diet and you had that in the back of your head that you don't want to raise your cholesterol, is there really a huge negative? Your general practitioner is probably going to put you on a statin anyway, especially if you're 50 years old. Is there necessarily a huge downside to going on the carnivore diet and staying on a statin or even starting a statin just so in the back of your head you're kind of lowering that risk that you're thinking?
That's a viable option for people. Like I said, I'm not going to dogmatically say no one should be on a statin. I do think there are clearly side effects. They're clear. In my view, these drugs, for a select portion of the population, they are probably net of benefit. For probably most of the population, they're probably meaningless. And for also a significant portion of the population, they are net negative for sure. So you have to weigh those things. And there are people out there that just blanket. They're just like, let's kill them all, let God sort it out type of thing. And we should be more nuanced around this. Not everybody that goes on a ketogenic, low carb or carnivore diet will see dramatic elevations in, say, things like LDL, cholesterol, ApoB, whatever you want, whatever the metric du jour it is, because they're all the same. LDL and ApoB run the same way. And so I consider them essentially the same thing. And I think that there was a nice meta-analysis that Adrian Sotomoto had done, just published back in, I think it was December or January, where they looked at, there was 40, I think around 44 or 41 low-carb RCTs, or randomized controlled trials. And what they found was the greatest predictor of LDL cholesterol elevation on a low-carb diet was BMI, low BMI, in fact. It was skinnier you were, the more likely you were to see this. And this is consistent with something called a lipid energy model, whereas the way I think about it is if my liver and my cells are full of energy, they're just dumb, fat, and happy, and they're sitting there, my liver does not need to traffic extra fat to my cells to fuel them. Now, if I'm in a low carb state and I'm depleted, like I don't have a lot of liver glycogen and I'm relatively lean, I'm not just stuffed with energy, then that liver is going to traffic more energy. And because there's not a lot of glycogen floating around, or less carbs floating around, then you're going to get a higher fat elevation. Now, the real question is that truly unhealthy? And I think I would say, is high cholesterol a problem? Probably for a large percent of the population it is, because most people have all these other metabolic disasters going on, whether they're pre-diabetic or chronically inflamed or whatever, visceral fat. You can pick and choose your markers of problems. And so you have a narrow window of a narrow selection of people that are lean, fit, healthy. Otherwise, all the risk factors look good. And if the LDL cholesterol is high in that situation, or the APO is high, and ApoB is high in that situation, is that a net increase risk? Not to say that the risk factor is not relevant, but is the overall effect of that up or down? And there's some data coming out. Matt Budov's study will be published later this year, which I suspect will show that it may not be. Now, could you additionally add Zetia as a tembine or statin or some other drug to lower that and even mitigate that risk even further? Sure, you could. Is it necessary? I don't know. That's the honesty. I'm happy to say I don't know because I don't. So I think, in my view, how do you hedge your bets? If you're over a certain age, at 26, you can do it. You can get imaging, but it's going to be not very helpful because I would expect you to have a 0 CAC score. And so, like I tell people, if they're over say 40, get a baseline CAC score. It's good information to have. And then if you decide, hey, I'm going to roll the dice, I'm just going to let my cholesterol ride because I think statins are evil, or I don't want to do it, or whatever your thoughts are, just check it again. Just check it again a couple years down the road, see where you're going. I think that makes sense to me. And I think because there was a great study out of Denmark, Mortensen did 2022, looking at 50,000 or so people. And they had the ones that had 0 CAC scores, it's called MACE, major adverse cardiac events, could be high, could be low, it didn't matter if the CAC score was 0. Now, if the CAC score was non-zero, then yes, it did have an impact on there. So that's interesting. And so the Budov study is interesting in the fact that they have, I don't know, maybe 30% of the population did have some plaque in their vessels. And so they do have whatever it takes to form plaque. And we'll see what the 1 year data is on high LDL, if it has an impact on it. So to me, it's unknown. I don't dismiss it. There are people out there, Dave Diamond, others, Nadir Ali, who will say, ignore cholesterol, doesn't matter. I'm just not comfortable saying that yet. Maybe I will down the road if the data supports that. But I think, like I said, I'm happy for myself. I'm willing to take risks personally that I'm not able to, or I don't want to force other people to do. It's very individual, and you have to make those decisions. And that's, again, it's a very nuanced topic. And I think unfortunately, we paint it either broadly one way, ignore cholesterol, statins are evil. And the other people are like, even when I was in medical school, this is back in the 1980s, into the 1980s, when statins just came out, I remember the family practice doctor saying, we need to put this stuff in the water. It's so great. And it's just, wait a minute. And it just doesn't, you think about it, in the course of humanity, and this is a very important concept, which I'm sure you're familiar, you understand, is it's not a drug deficiency. You're not deficient in whatever, methotrexate. That's not your problem, right? It's something else. And we got, like I said, as I mentioned, we got to get people to stop poisoning themselves. That is such an important concept.
Yeah. And I think that you've harped on it quite a few times about, you always try to say humble and have a little bit of humility and say there's not much that we do know about medicine, even with the carnivore diet. And you've become one of the faces of this diet, and you're one of the few ones out there that still to this day say, I don't actually know the long-term effects. We don't even know the long-term effects of veganism or any diet, really. And I think that's something that we don't have a lot of in medicine, and we definitely need a little bit more, because we're in this age now where everything's clipped to 6 seconds and you have to be all or nothing on a topic. So staying a little bit humble about a topic like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've said him repeatedly. Of course, I don't know the long-term effects of a carnivore diet. No one does, and no one ever will, in my view. It's just to rigorously test that scientifically is literally impossible. It's financially impossible. It's ethically impossible. Yeah. So I'm like, I don't really get too excited about talking about people's 30 years down the road. I really, like I said, this is a thing that I think of more physicians were worried about the patient in front of them and making them stop suffering. And I know that's what drugs are for, basically. But I mean, you can actually, like I said, you get somebody with Crohn's disease, and they're literally pooping blood 20 times a day and miserable, and they're emaciated because they can't eat. You take that person, you put them on a damn carnivore diet, and literally their symptoms go away, and they turn back into a normal person. That to me is powerful. That is one of the most beautiful things about medicine that we can do. And to ignore that because, we don't want to raise your risk for cardiovascular disease in 50 years. I mean, it's like, fuck. It's like,
if you have somebody that's suffering that much now, it's not like you can make it that much worse anyways. Like, you might as well try something like that. That's not going to, the worst case scenario is really not going to make things much worse. So I totally agree with you there. The conversation about raising cardiovascular disease in somebody that's suffering on a day-to-day basis because of something else, is ridiculous when you actually get to see the patient
I've
firsthand.
asked those people, and I can't even tell you how many hundreds upon hundreds of interviews I've done over the years now of people in that situation. And I've made it a point to ask many of them, hey, you feel better now. What about your cardiovascular risk? And they're like, I don't care, man. I could care less because I was miserable. I was ready to die. And this is so much better for me. And I'm like, hey, now press on. You just, like I said, do the best you can. And I think that to me is a big win for most people. And hopefully more people will wake up. If not, Revero kick ass and we'll make all the money. And the rest of the dinosaurs will still be in there pushing the pills and having miserable patients. So, and miserable, unsatisfying medical careers. I'll add to that. So anyway, I'll tell you what, man, Clay, I got to go, man. It was a pleasure. Social media, I don't know. Do you want to share anything?
Not yet. We actually are going to start up a podcast at some point in the next few months, especially after intern year ends. It'll be called Poolside Rounds. So it'll be a laid back setting where we talk about complex medical topics, probably with some sunglasses on next to a pool somewhere. Yeah, I figured I'd plug that in there. But no, Dr. Baker, I really appreciate it, man. I've been a big fan for a while, and I just
good luck and good luck with the rest of the internship year. I know it'll be good to get that one behind you and on to better things. So anyway, thanks a bunch.